What's up everyone, this is DR with the WoW Breakdown 101, and I've seen a lot of people asking this question in the community without a solid answer out there. The answer I'm sure is out there, so I'm going to do a video so there's another place where people can find this information. A lot of people have been asking, which is better for Frost Death Knights? Is it a two-handed Frost DK, or is it dual wield Frost Death Knight? Now, this class is my speciality as I've mained a Frost DK for this entire expansion. Now I'm going to go over which spec is better for PvP, and which spec is better for PvE, and I will explain why. Now I'm going to go over PvP for a second. Now, if you're the person that wants to play the best spec per class no matter what you are doing, then you will want to look at Unholy for PvP, as this is currently the best spec for arenas and PvP at the moment for Death Knight. The reason for this is, as Unholy you have pets that do a lot of damage, along with your dots doing a lot of damage. So, like I said, if you're going to try PvP, I implore you to go and look at Unholy. But if you're one of those die-hardcore fans that no matter what, you're going to play Frost DK, that's fine. That is totally fine. If you're going to do Frost in PvP, then you're going to want to do two-handed Frost. And the reason for this is that when you get in range of melee attacks, you want as much damage for those few seconds to go out as possible. You all have been there when someone is kiting you and they're just out of melee range, your grip comes off cooldown, you grip them in, fire off a few obliterates, frost strikes. Those few seconds you have on that person, you need to hit for large chunks of health to put the pressure on. Now, if you are toe-to-toe, then dual wield and PvP will pull slightly ahead, but that's hardly ever the case. Two-hand wins in PvP by a long shot. Now, let's talk about PvE, and if you're wanting to raid, which spec does the most damage? During the early stages of the expansion, all the way up through TOT, Throne of Thunder that is, and towards the end of Throne of Thunder, two-hand had a slight advantage on damage between the two specs, and boy did I love it in Throne of Thunder. Two-handed Frost DK has a much higher skill cap between the two specs, which made it more fun in my opinion. However, this skill cap is taken away in Warlords of Draenor, and let me explain how. One of the things with your two-handed spec is your obliterates was your main source of damage. That's what separated the men from the boys when it comes to two-handed Frost Death Knights. Your obliterate does a lot of extra damage per dot that is on the target. Frost Fever and Blood Plague, which meant that if you obliterate with one or both of these dots not on your target, you lost a shit ton of damage. In Warlords of Draenor, this part of the skill has been removed, and I would assume that the dot damage is increased to make up for the difference. Let's get back to the subject at hand. We're now in Siege of Orgrimmar. Now, what is better, dual wield Frost or two-handed Frost? And here is the simple answer. Once you hit around a 540 item level, you really need to start going towards and gearing towards dual wield, as this spec is outperforming two-handed by a pretty large margin. Embarrassingly so, if you ask me. In normal gear, a dual wield will out DPS a two-handed heroic geared Frost DK in about 80% of all the fights. Let's go over why two-handed Frost Death Knights have fell so far behind. In Throne of Thunder, you're two-handed geared and gemmed toward haste to get runes back as fast as possible so they can get more obliterates. Due to the amount of haste that two-handed Frost DKs had at the end of the patch, Killing Machine procs, which guarantees a critical strike for obliterate and frost strikes, had most DKs critting over 50% of their obliterates. The key to high DPS as a two-handed Frost Death Knight was to smash the faces of your enemies with obliterate. Now comes the issue with the level of the gear in Siege of Orgrimmar. Due to the haste already being at global cooldown capped and some heroic geared DKs already at global cooldown capped from Throne of Thunder, meant that putting any more haste into your two-handed DK would be a waste. And Mastery only increases your frost damage, which as a two-handed Death Knight, your obliterates is your damage, which left you with the optimal gearing of crit for two-handed, which gets you more crits from obliterate. But wait a minute, you're already critting over 50% of your obliterates, so even gearing towards crit really isn't helping all that much. And this has become a nasty problem with your two-handed Frost Death Knights now as you get gear from Siege of Orgrimmar. Overall, your crit, your haste levels, and your masteries came close to being even through the gear. Crit does not help that much at this point of the game due to the fact that you always have a Killing Machine proc waiting for your obliterate, and due to the amount of resources two-handed Frost Death Knights are now generating with high gear in Siege of Orgrimmar, meant that about 30% of those Killing Machine procs were actually being spent on frost strikes to prevent runic points from being capped. Now, what this means is if you go back and look at the two-handed Frost Death Knight's damage during the Throne of Thunder, and look at their damage now, you'll notice that Frost Strike was doing more damage in some cases now in Siege of Orgrimmar than Obliterate. And Howling Blast was up there close as well. This is because you are Frost Striking a lot more, your mastery is a lot higher, meaning that you're getting more damage from your Frost Strikes and your Frost damage abilities than you are from your Obliterate, for the simple fact of the way the gear is scaled now. And if you take a look in early Throne of Thunder, you will notice that your Obliterate was destroying and decimating your Frost Strike ability and your Howling Blast damage done. Now let's take a look at Dual Wield Frost. Most of the encounters in Siege of Orgrimmar has adds and splash damage going out, which plays right into the hands of Dual Wield. Due to the gear scaling in Siege of Orgrimmar, the master build of the Dual Wield Frost puts out a lot more damage throughput than two-handed Frost. Almost embarrassingly so, and actually it is embarrassingly so. The fact that two-handed Frost Death Knight Frost damage abilities are doing more damage than their bread and butter Obliterate in most cases, and that's what two-handed is built around, goes to show you that if you go dual wield, which is built around heavy frost damage, is a no-brainer on why your dual wield Frost DK build will pull more damage than your two-handed Frost Death Knight. Now I'm going to go over why I think so many that try to change from two-handed to dual wield in this point of the game may not be pulling the numbers they was in their two-handed Frost Death Knight, making them say, hey, I don't care what anyone says, two-handed is better and I'm beating dual wield players. To those players, I say if you are honestly beating a dual wield Frost Death Knight at this point in the game and your gear is close to one another, then your dual wield player is not nearly as good of a player as you are. And if you switch to dual wield properly, you will destroy those players. Now, I'm not trying to sound like an ass, that is just the facts of it right now. World top players will always play the spec that does the most damage, and you will be hard pressed to find any two-handed Frost Death Knights in the rankings or the logs. I have looked up the dual wield Frost guides, and every one of them that tells you your skill priorities are wrong. Icy Veins and Noxic both tell you to use Obliterate in your rotation to get rid of your unholy runes, and this is wrong and will lead to a huge DPS loss. First off, if you have been playing two-handed Frost, then your whole rotation has been built around good Obliterates, which means that you will be casting Obliterates at the incorrect time as dual wield Frost, and you may be casting Obliterate a little bit too much. This actually was an issue I was having, and I read into it a little bit deeper and I asked myself, why should I Obliterate as a dual wield Frost Death Knight? And the answer was, if you get a Rhyme proc from your Obliterate, then it costs you one unholy rune, and the Frost rune that you would have used for Howling Blast you got back for free. And you didn't want your unholy rune sitting there not being used, because that would be a waste of resources and a waste of DPS. Then I took the math and it proved that first off, yes, Obliterate in the best case scenario costs one unholy rune that hits much harder than the Plague Strike, which costs one unholy rune, but the damage increase from the Obliterate had a Howling Blast or the free Howling Blast Rhyme not procced actually just cost me damage. This is the correct DPS priority to have as a dual wield Frost Death Knight, and once you get this down pat, your dual wield DPS will always outperform your two-handed Frost on every fight. First thing you're going to do is you're going to take Obliterate completely off your skill bars, and you'll never cast it as a dual wield Frost. The priorities of your skills are, number 1, Frost Strike on Killing Machine proc, or when you're going to cap on Runic power. Number 2, Howling Blast. Number 3, get your Blood Plague up with various abilities, Outbreak or Plague Strike. Number 4, Frost Strike. And number 5, Plague Strike. Now you may notice that I didn't say get Frost Fever up, and that's for the simple fact, hey, your Howling Blast, Frost Fever is always going to be up as a dual wield Frost Death Knight. Now, here is the key through your process to this rotation. This is what you want to have your mindset at. You want to ensure that you have your Plague Leech talent from your first tier, and that you have the Blood Tap talent from your level 75 tier of talents. Just go ahead and macro your Blood Tap in with your Frost Strike so that you always have a steady flow of rune regeneration that you will start to get the feel for. The next thing you want to do is have in mind how you're going to use Plague Leech to your advantage. Now, as a dual wield Frost Death Knight, we want to use as many Howling Blast from our runes as possible. When you use Plague Leech, ensure that both of your unholy runes and one other rune is completely on cooldown. What this does is it gives you a chance to get a death rune as an unholy rune, giving you an extra Howling Blast you normally would not get. When you do this, keep your rotation back to normal with one difference. Don't use Plague Strike until that death rune that's in your Unholy Rune slots has been used on a Howling Blast. It is good to try to line up your Plague Leech with your cooldown of your Outbreak. Also, it's very important as a dual wield Frost to take advantage of your anti-magic shell. Anytime you can cap runic power from using anti-magic shell, you want to change your rotation and dump all your runic power at once, so that your AMS has been used up. You will be sitting back at runic cap, giving you lots of extra burst damage. Try to line up cooldowns with doing this technique. Once you give this a try, I promise you will find that dual wield in Siege of Orgrimmar is always the way to go. And guys, if you're rating in your guild and in progression, then please don't say, well, it does not matter, because every bit of extra damage you can put out will help your guild out a lot. Well, there you go, guys and gals. You have your answer for dual wield versus two-handed frost. Jump in and try it out, and always have fun. Have a suggestion for future videos, and leave them in the comments section below, or email me at thewowbreakdown@gmail.com. Have fun, and see you again next time.